Hey guys, welcome back to Star Wars Timeline. Today we're continuing to discuss the new Jedi Order with lovely Meg from Meg Reviews. Guys, in the beginning we're gonna have quick synopsis from the previous story, and we're gonna get into the current book that we're talking about, the trilogy of the Force Heretic, which we together completely, totally adore. There's no difference in opinion here, I'm pretty sure, or maybe I'm just guessing. In the beginning, let's give a word to Meg. Meg, how are you doing? How's your week been going?
I'm doing great. I'm got a lot of stuff going on in my
Mhm.
non-Star Wars life, and then in my Star Wars life, I'm finishing up the Legacy of the Force series,
Mhm.
which has been an emotional journey.
Not for the first time, right? You've read it before.
I read part of it before. I guess the biggest kicker for me is that back in the
Ooh.
day, I never finished it. I rage quit after Sacrifice. So I'm
Ooh.
definitely in no man's land at this point.
That is exciting. I had no idea. I was under the impression that you read the full thing. That's going to be quite a discussion because, guys, we're actually, if plans are going to align for me and Meg, I'm pretty sure we're going to try to make the schedule. And actually, after that, we finish up with the new Jedi Order. Hopefully, you and I we get to go through the entire Legacy series. Oh man, I can't wait! Like, especially you're gonna have those fresh, raw emotions. So it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see your response to it. Meg, what would you say is the difference, as far as Star Wars fans go, between reading Star Wars, playing via video games, or watching Star Wars? What are the differences between those different ways we interact with storytelling?
Yeah, well, I think it gives you a very different experience. Like if you
Yeah.
play video games, they took you to so many different interesting locations that you never saw in the films, and especially the video games sort of focused, I don't want to say heavily, but there was a lot of stuff that obviously was never covered in the movies, either,
Right.
inner between episodes or just like all the KOTOR stuff that's set like old Republic era. And then the books for me, I really found a way to continue the story from the movies that like a lot of people, I came out of the movies and I was like, what happens next? And the books was a way to like fulfill that wish for me.
Mhm.
So I love the movies, but for me the movies were almost a jumping off point to the books and the games and everything else that came out.
Yeah, eventually I realized that because of my passion for reading and books in general, obviously we all grew up watching Star Wars, right? You
Yeah.
probably, for most people, their first exposure was via a television show. Like, I know there's a lot of fans who were introduced via the Clone Wars show or
Mhm.
movies that you saw in theater. But once I started reading, I realized that the larger world where my most emotional intellectual investment goes to is actually in the books,
Yeah.
both the legends and the canon novels. And the difference I felt that was between the very interesting between the books and video games, that books opened you up to these new worlds, new alien species, but you kind of had to build a mental picture of it. But then when you saw it in video game and interacted with it, for
Yes.
example, in the Old Republic video games, you go to the planet, the Sith world of Korriban. Reading it is one thing. Yes, you get all these juicy details and they describe to you the architecture and different Sith lords. But when you actually see it on the screen and get to interact with it, that's a whole different experience.
Yeah.
Who would you say the new Jedi Order series is for? What we're particularly talking about in this podcast, and why would you recommend it?
I would say if you're interested in not just our original heroes, but the next generation of Jedi Knights, like Luke, Luke's, well, he's a baby at that point, so maybe don't count Ben in there, but Leia and Han's children. And then two, if you read the Bantam era books and you were sort of like, I mean, they're fun, but like nothing happens. Oh boy, wait until you hit the new Jedi Order, because it's not just about like the rise of this new generation of heroes, but also like stakes are real now. Like
Mhm.
no one's safe and you have no idea what's going to happen next.
Yeah, these galaxy shifting events, right, that you could have never anticipated. Say, oh no, this character got killed off, or this planet got totally devastated. I never thought, imagined they would do it. And indeed, they went for it. They went for the biggest punches in this series,
Yeah.
at least up to that point. Um, I would say what really pulled me in personally was how the prose and the style of storytelling was vastly different from Bantam era. Bantam era, I would characterize as something that is very pulpy intentionally. And it taps into like the Buck Rogers and other George Lucas's influences, that it deliberately makes it almost like a space fantasy. You know there's going to be a happy ending. You know the heroes are going to come through, you know, and be victorious every time. And I actually do enjoy it. That simplicity of storytelling. That's why I'm a huge Bantam era fan. I'm pretty sure you know you personally enjoy quite a few books from there too. But New Jedi Order was almost like a grim, darker themed science fiction with all of these, you know, different biological weapons and worlds being destroyed, and these new alien species, which are not these like, ooh, these colorful exotic lizards who are just going to try to attack out of nowhere. Talking about you, Trusa Bakura, and I'll stand by that. The Bakurans, I like them. I enjoy them a lot. But anyway, you could feel how different it was. And Meg, consistently, the question of canon versus legends comes along, whether you're on Twitter or Facebook, your YouTube interaction with your fans via your comments. Was Expanded Universe canon from your personal perspective as a fan, as you were reading it?
It was for me, I think, because, you know, you could always say, oh, well, things could have turned out differently. But I feel like, especially after you've read so many books, like, it feels to you like, yeah, this is what happens to Leia and Han. This is what happens to Luke. This is what happens to Lando. And like, you're invested in their journeys. And so for me, starting out with the Thrawn trilogy, then just moving onward, it was like, I 100%, up to a certain point. I feel like it reached a point in the book speed, you know, like the later and later and later ones, where I was like, all right, I'm not crazy about this. But like up to a certain point, I was like, yeah, I buy that. Like, this is what happens to them next.
I discovered the books by complete like accident, just walking into a regular mini like convenience store in a bus, you know, terminal we have here in northern Manhattan, and I just stumbled across Star Wars books. I was like, hold on a second, does the story continue?
Yeah.
Does it take place parallel to the films? Is it something as a spin-off that the authors decided to do on their own? I didn't have answers to all those questions. Guys, we're talking about mid to late 90s. We didn't have as much information available. Wikipedia was not around. YouTube was not around. And I honestly, I was just taking it all in stride. I'm like, okay, I guess that's where they're taking the story next. And as I was reading more and more and became more experienced, and obviously started discovering Star Wars.net, you know, with their book reviews, I started realizing that indeed there's this one concerted effort to make a continuation of the official saga, and George Lucas kind of like presided over it, and he sort of approved some key moments here and there. But I realized in the matter, the reason I'm asking you this question, that for me personally, like, it didn't matter. As long as I enjoyed the story, as long as I realized that aligns with my perception of Star Wars, what I learned about in the original trilogy, yeah, that was cool. And then many years after, when I read the original Star Wars spin-off novel, right, The Splinter of the Mind's Eye, 1977, where George didn't even know his books are going to blow up, his movies are going to blow up and become this, you know, global phenomenon. When you read that particular book, it is, in my eyes, so inconsistent with Star Wars. It literally has nothing to do with it. It feels like a horror, pulpy short story or something like that. Like Luke and Leia, completely unrecognizable. And I said to myself, well, is that part of the official canon too? Well, not to me. And for me, this is where the debate begins and ends, what I personally enjoy. How is it for you?
Yeah, and I feel that's how I feel, because there are books where I read them and I'm like, that's not my Luke, like Crystal Star. I don't know what's going on with him, but he doesn't feel right. And then so it's almost like when I do my personal rereads, I pick the ones that feel true to me. And there's a number of them that I'm just like, yeah, not you. You don't get revisited.
Yeah. And I think, you know, to say along lines of what we're talking about, it's totally fine if you want to completely take it literally and it was part of a huge canon for you. I know there's a lot of old school fans who are not down with the new Star Wars, whether it's books and movies. That's totally fine too. I think for me personally, it's the best place to come from, where you absorb it on an individual level, how you choose to see it. Anyway, guys, we are jumping in our current discussion, but very quick reminder, right? The New Jedi Order is a publication of books which took place from 1999 to 2003. It features 19 adult novels with some short stories as well. It's part of Star Wars Legends, and it's obviously not considered part of the current canon. And it portrays the events from 21 to 25 years after the events of the original films, where Luke Skywalker is restoring the Jedi Order in full swing, and these new intergalactic invaders called the Yuzong Vong come over and they try to devastate and take over the whole galaxy. Now, Meg, let's remind the fans who are watching this podcast where we left off last time. We were covering the book called Destiny's Way by Walter John Williams, which was published in October of 2002. A very quick synopsis of the events. It's a pivotal point into intergalactic war. We see the chink in the Yuzong Vong armor. Infiltrates in Nomanor, discovers that Supreme Overlord Shimmer's promises are all a lie. The Jedi infiltration team, the young Jedi, including Jason and Jaina Solo, which also Anakin Solo was a part of, who were there to dispatch the Voxing Quinn, they're now promoted to full Jedi Knights, with Jaina Solo being labeled the Sword of the Jedi for her accomplishments. The new alliance executes an ambitious plan. They set up a trap on Ebac 9. At the heart of battle, Vergiri goes after Jason Solo, but sacrifices herself to save him. She crashes her A-Wing into the moon's air supply, killing off an overwhelming army of the enemy, of the Yuzong Vong warriors. Jaina defeats her toughest opponent yet, War Master Tsavang La, and the new alliance is rebranded into Galactic Federation of Free Alliances. Spy Master Nomanor is labeled as a traitor, and he escapes with a death mark placed on him. Supreme Overlord Shimbra and his shamed ally Anami realize the Vong are in major trouble. They are on the rebound. They need to figure out their strategy. Now we are on book 15, which is the first book in the Force Heretic trilogy, co-written by Sean Williams and Shane Dix. This one released in February of 2003, and the events here take place 28 years after the Battle of Yavin, after the original movies. Before we start the discussion, Meg, you know that I always enjoy talking about the artwork in Star Wars novels, because that, to me, that's a huge selling point. I'm just a huge fan of those. How did you find those particular covers for the Force Heretic trilogy by John Foster?
I was like mixed feelings about them, because on one hand, like I thought they looked really cool, like very impressionistic almost. And I love that they're showing like in the middle of an action scene. But at the same time, I feel like on the cover for the first one, Remnant, that Luke and Mara look real weird. Luke's just like face strange. Mara's outfit strange.
So you found her outfit strange. Okay.
I found her outfit. It's like a dress, and it's got these like little, I don't know, leather looking things going down the side. I was just like, girl, that's not practical. Why are you wearing that? Yeah, so it's like I like the idea behind them, but I feel like the way he represents the characters feels a little off to me. But that may just be because, like, of the new Jedi Order covers, my favorite were the 3 Greg Keyes novels where the artwork was done by Therese Nielsen, because like I loved her art style and I loved how she portrayed the characters here. And so here it was like, I like the idea, but they look strange.
For me, being used to looking at a lot of comic book art, I looked at these covers and they were also like a double-edged sword for me. On one hand, the locales themselves, the backgrounds and the characters looked very exotic to me. I enjoyed the color palette. So something immediately pulled my eye, and the word cool was definitely part of that experience. Like, oh, cool. On the other hand, this is the age where digital art became far more prominent in commercial art.
Yeah.
Right. In that time, like late 90s, early 2000s, already you could see some photoshopped work being introduced, but predominantly all the work has been done by hand. Here, if I'm not mistaken, and guys, please correct me in the comment section below, but I believe all of those 3 covers, at least they look like digital paintings.
Yeah.
And herein comes a problem where a lot of artists jumped on that medium, and it kind of has its strengths and weaknesses, and the weakness comes from lack of understanding of depth of field and overall gestural work, but how the characters look. Like you mentioned the art for the first one, the book we're discussing today. What really made it awkward for me, I kind of enjoyed Luke's weathered look in it, and I do enjoy Mara Jade, the way her outfit looks, but their postures, their gestures are very flat and very unnatural. Like Luke is, like really, that's how you.
And she's like so far back.
Yeah. It's if the artist did was taking an interpretation and it wasn't going for a realistic look, it's too far out there. You are portraying an action scene after all, and you got to sell the impact of it to us, sell the the dynamic of it. So it felt very flat at the same time. So it almost felt like, yes, it's digital painting. He's rocking out with the colors, but the gestural work kind of was. I didn't enjoy it. Anyway, should we dive into the story?
Sure.
So the book opens up yet again with a major action scene. The Jedi Master, the Barabel Sabah Sabatine, she learns that her homeworld is being ravaged by the Yuzong Vong invaders. She fights off a group of coral skippers over Barab's one's orbit, and she takes out a large enemy ship. Only later she realizes that it was actually a transport carrying Barabel prisoners. And she retreats absolutely devastated and enraged for accidentally attacking her own people. How's this moment important in Sabah's development? What does it say about her, the new Jedi Order in general?
I think up to this point, when we've seen Sabah, she's been, sort of this interesting character because she's a Barabel, so she's completely non-human. Like her sense of humor does not correlate with ours at all, but she's also like a fierce fighter. And I think this moment really shows her vulnerabilities that, she goes in fighting like absolutely not. The Yuzong Vong cannot do this to my homeworld. But she doesn't realize that in taking out their transport that she's killing scores and scores of her own people. And I think it sets up like this dilemma in her mind going forward of like, when do I take action and when do I not? Because I thought I was doing the right thing, taking action here, and I caused harm.
And how do you feel her actions, incidental or not, reflect on how the new Jedi Order operates at this point?
Yeah, I think up to this, for the early novels, Luke was very hesitant to take any action, which was frustrating for me at times as a reader. But then we reached sort of a turning point in Star by Star where he was like, no, we have to do things. And so I think a lot of the Jedi wholeheartedly accepted that, like, yeah, we have to do things. We have to go on the offensive. And here it's almost like, well, wait a minute, but let's think about that, because Sabah went on the offensive and it didn't work out well for her.
Yeah, I found Sabah very relatable here. You mentioned earlier that she's not human, and the authors before had a very well described her non-human personality and sensibilities, like her humor, how she could be enraged but still may control herself because she's the Jedi Master. And here it's just very relatable and very human emotion of just making a mistake and being wrong and not having, even as wise, the wisest Jedi would not have this foresight to see that it was actually her own planet and her own people that she's attacking. So, and the other part of it was, it showed that the new Jedi Order and Luke Skywalker as the headmaster of it, they didn't have the answers to all the questions and all the tragic experiences that the Jedi confront. And that makes it so much more interesting to me. One of the ideas that I was wrestling in the Star Wars prequels is that how the Jedi, these sanctimonious, above everyone else, we're the light of the galaxy kind of the Jedi. We have all the answers, which obviously it also shows their flaws in that same very trilogy. But it was very hard for me to grapple with that idea. Here, we're seeing an organization that tries to be the beacon of light and hopefulness for the galaxy. But at the same time, we realize they're people and they make mistakes. And it makes so much more interesting to me. Moving on, 3 months later, Luke Skywalker, his wife Mara Jade, their nephew Jason Solo, a Jedi Knight Techley, who is a Chadra fan, they look like little bats without the wings, and Danny Q, the scientist from the first New Jedi Order novel, Vector Prime, they go searching for this mysterious exotic planet, Zenoma Secord, a mysterious planet that moves through space. Jason Solo believes it's the key in winning the war based on the information that Vergiri, his former mentor, told him. On the other hand, Han, Leia, Jaina Solo, their daughter, and Jagged Fell, the human ship's pilot, they could take a small alliance fleet to reestablish contact in the unknown regions. Now we see in this novel something that happens often. Friends split up into groups.
Yeah.
And it pursued different missions in different parts of the galaxy. Do you enjoy this particular trope?
It's hard to say because I always love everyone working together, but I feel like sometimes to progress the plot, like you do have to split them up. Like Empire Strikes Back, you have Leia and Han off here and Luke off here, and they both learn things along the way that's important for the next step of their journey. So like here I could 100% by them going off in search of Zonama Seacoast, because especially what we learned in Destiny's Way, it seemed like, okay, this planet may be the key because it also has biotechnology like the Yuuzhan Vong, so maybe we should investigate that. But then Han and Leia's mission, it was like, we got to reestablish communication with these other places, and I'm like, but why? I mean, other than giving us a chance to revisit worlds we haven't seen since the Bantam era, I went into their mission a little bit like, okay, you got to prove this to me, how essential this is.
So it's basically, in a way, Leia back to her shenanigans of being a politician. It's like, oh, let's go over there and reestablish the link over here, and it doesn't always work for everyone, right?
Yeah, I would agree.
Before I answer my own question, I wanted to follow it up with talk a little bit about the character dynamics, when the major cast is together versus when they're apart.
Yeah, well, obviously, Jaina and Jason have this huge connection as twins that, they just went through this horrific experience together, and then Jason was captured by the Yuuzhan Vong, and Jaina thought he was dead. And so they've barely had any time to reunite. And then we're splitting them apart again on 2 separate missions. So I was a little like, oh, well, okay.
Not what you were hoping for?
Not what I was hoping for. But it does sort of, Jason has always had a little thing for Danny Quee. So sending them off together, I'm like, will something happen there? And obviously Jaina and Jagged Fell have a thing. So it's like, what's going to happen there? And I think, too, throwing Tahiri Vela into the mix, who she is sent off with Leia and Han, not because they really need her, more because they want to keep an eye on her, because after Anakin's death, she's sort of behaving in a troubling way. So it almost felt like pairing some characters off because something's going to happen, and maybe sending Tahiri off with Leia and Han and Jaina because they're going to be helpful for whatever happens next with her.
I really, really enjoy this particular trope, especially in the cases where the payoff is really strong, where there was a purposeful kind of like mission. Because what I found it allows the authors to do is, obviously you have tiers of characters, right? You have the most popular ones, is just what fans prefer. Fans always want to see Jaina, they always want to see Jason, and so forth.
Yeah.
But when you split them up, you sort of like pocket them in these small areas in the galaxy. And when you're dealing, let's say, with a larger cast of characters, your minor upper tier and the lower supported tier characters, what you're allowing, at least my experience was, I get to remember names better. And who these characters are, and I have to look up who Chadra fan aliens look like anymore, because she's over here in this side of the galaxy. But also what it allows to do, it sort of takes your one prime character like Jason Solo and makes the supporting characters much more viable around him, because they have more spotlight, they have more agency, they get to do their thing, and suddenly they no longer feel like, I'm here just to show you how evil this or that person is, or how smart Jason is. They now become their own characters, and it snowballs later on. I mean, if Timothy Zahn's original Throne trilogy, if Winter was just like a character, a name, because they were willing to take her and place her in different situations, different adventures. By the time you get to, I don't know, book number 21, you're like, oh my God, Winter is back. Awesome.
Yeah.
It's like a family member or friend. Or when you watch a really long TV show that you're really invested in, you kind of welcome them back. Like, hey, it's no longer just Han, Leia, Luke, all these other characters. I mean, by this time, you and I, our audience who watch us know pretty much that you and I are huge of Seba 17 fans. She's family. I want to see her as much as I want to see other characters because how excellently she's written and how in these isolated storylines she gets her spotlight. Moving on. So back on Coruscant, which has been terraformed, a quick reminder, and the Yuzong Vong call it the Yuzon Tar, a former spy, Nomanor, hides in the underworld, where he comes across a group of shamed ones, the outcast Vong workers, the undesirables. They inform a new faith centered around the Jedi as their saviors, which is a complete and total heresy. And Nomanor gains their trust and begins to plan on reinstating his status or reputation somehow. What do you expect from Nomanor during this encounter?
I mean, Nominor, he's just such a weasel. So the whole time you're like, this is so interesting, like the Jedi heresy, what's going on? But you're also like, okay, but how is this going to best serve Nominor? Because he's not going to get involved in this unless this is going to help him in some way. And I think I saw someone once describe him as like the Doctor in Lost in Space, where he's just like chaos serving chaos, but he's so interesting that every time he pops up, you're like, yeah, tell me more.
Was there any hope of him changing his ways?
I'm not sure because, I mean, part of what I love so much about his character is how self-serving he is. So, like, even when he's doing something that seems to be good and seems to be, you know, going to have a positive outcome in this world, I'm still suspicious of like why he's doing it, because I'm just not sure that he would ever become wholly good unless that would help him in some way.
Yeah. He can't help himself. He is after his own, you know, goals. And like, you're right to call him a weasel, but at the same time, every time I read on him, I marvel. It's like, wow, you have a new plan.
Yeah.
You have a new idea. There's something like cooking, like behind the scenes. He's constantly after something. And he almost reminds me of, have you seen The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, the classic Western film?
Yes.
If you recall Eli Wallach's character, the Ugly, he's not really the villain of the story. The villain is the bad guy. Tuco just can't help himself. Yeah. He's a product of his environment, no love, no attention from family. He's just this vagabond who turns like a bandit. And that's what he is. He's not innately evil. He does bad things. I'm not going to defend him, right? He slaps his like priest brother in the face. But there was, even there was this justified rage in him. It was like, why are you judging me? You're not supposed to judge. You're a priest. Yeah. Same sort of thing is happening here. There's no excuse for what Nomanor is doing. But I personally couldn't help but marvel. It's like, dude, you're so resourceful. You're so hell-bent on never stopping and just pushing through no matter what. Even if it's selfish, even if it's like these are personal traits and qualities we're not supposed to applaud. I'm like, bro, if anything else, like you got the charisma, you got the tenacity, and I got to support that.
Yes.
Moving on. Luke Skywalker and Mara's group makes a stop by the Imperial capital world Bastion to learn that it's under attack. The Imperial flagship Star Destroyer Chimera is heavily damaged. It escapes to Yaga Minor. We learn that the Grand Admiral Palayan, who was presumed dead, surprise, he's alive. And the Chadra fan Jedi healer Tikli brings him out of the coma into the healing back to tank for further, you know, for getting better. Luke's Jedi and the Imperial leader formulate a plan for a new battle on the planet of Borosk. Were you surprised that Palayan survived the attack?
A little bit, just because he is so old. He's like, what, in his 80s? So it's a little like, oh, I thought you were a goner, but you know, I love Palayan, so seeing him pull through, I was fine with that. But I was a little surprised by his survival here, but I also think because Leia and Han had gone to the Imperial Remnant in the previous book, trying to get them to ally with them, and they were like, no, we're good. And so I think if we hadn't had Pelaeon still in charge, getting the Imperial Remnant to join with the Galactic Alliance would have been a lot harder to pull off.
Mm-hmm. Continuing that thought, what are your thoughts on the Grand Admiral Pelaeon and the Imperial Remnant at this point?
I think that they showed up in the Dark Tide duology to help out. And then when things went absolutely bonkers there, they were like, nope, 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 we're pulling out, we're pulling out. And they were like, well, we haven't been attacked yet. And I think they finally started to realize that they were too small for the Yuuzhan Vong to worry about. But now that the Yuuzhan Vong are sort of like consolidating and they have Coruscant, that they are going to go after them. And since they're so small, they need to ally themselves with the Alliance or they're just not going to survive.
Yeah, in more books, more often than not, the Moffs are generally described as being very stubborn and bickering and like being politicking. But I think at this point in the story, they begin to re-examine their stance on the war. And I felt the way that it was handled was very nuanced and well, where now they are saying, look, despite what the Moffs are saying, the situation is unavoidable. We have to join forces. We got to regroup and attack together as one united front within your alliance. Otherwise, we're going to perish. So even they're not that stupid. And, you know, I always sort of admired when I learned about the Imperial Remnant. The Emperor was the Emperor and Vader was Vader. Complete terror, complete like devastation and control of the free worlds. But after the fact, when you look at somebody like not as much Thrawn as much as Pelaeon and these remnants, I understood the sovereignty that they wanted to have of the Imperial world. And I respected the fact that at least Pelaeon tried to pull things together and say, look, we believe in the old... They're almost like conservatives. Like, we believe in the old ways. We were more peaceful. We were more organized this way. Whether it was true or not is debatable. But I at least admired where they stood. And here... it's a pivotal point, and I kind of felt for him a little bit. I was sympathetic. It's like, ooh, you know, it's like they have to break the mold now. They can't follow the old ways. Now it's the situation is spiraling out of control. It's changing dramatically for them, and they got to make this very tough decision.
Yeah.
While Han and Leia's group arrive on Galantis, and Jenna takes Twin Sun Squadron in orbit, Tahiri Vela, once again, a reminder, a former Vong prisoner. She's being tortured. She's been manipulated by them, and at one point even believed herself to be one of the Yuuzhan Vong. So Tahiri Vela wanders off, and we know that she had a previous incident on Mon Calamari where she completely fainted without memories of what happened to her. And she returns to her suit with the Yuuzhan Vong totem on Yun Yonka, the god of war. She confronts local guards who come for her with a lightsaber. But once again, that incident repeats and she faints yet again. Jaina Solo encounters a Yevathan pilot on the planet's N'Zoth, who informs his home is destroyed by the Vong and self-destructs his ship, and she's back to the Galantis. Plus, we learn that the Vong forces have arrived and they're actually attacking Galantis again. They're basically hopping from planet to planet, attacking different strategic points. Tahiri's misadventure has film noir vibes to it. It's like almost a mini detective story and a mystery to solve. What did you make of that plot point? Did you like it?
Well, it's like there's all this stuff like in her mind. So we almost see her like she's constantly back on the world ship on Merkur, and there's like, you know, funeral pyres and she's running from something. So on the one hand, you're like, oh, well, like what's going on? Like what's chasing her? Will she figure it out? But on the other hand, she does come across to me a little bit as like a damsel in distress, the way that she's always like running panicked and fainting, and then they're like, what happened to Hiri? And she's like, I don't remember. And there was a bit of me that was like, oh, okay, can we hurry this up? Can we resolve this?
You know, I really, really enjoyed it a lot because I love Tahir Vela. I love the whole drama centered around her and, you know, Anakin Solo. And in this part of her life, she felt to me like a war veteran with a PTSD.
Mm.
Right, because if it came out of nowhere and like she's just one of the force sensitive who starts having these visions, like, and it was almost like a mind trick to keep the audience guessing what's going to happen next, I would have been in the same position as you. Like, can we flip a few pages forward and keep it moving with the story? But I'm taking into account what I read before,
Right.
what happens with her, the whole torture, the whole loss of her lover. And we're here now. And I was so just emotionally invested in what's happening with her. And at least in my memory, she didn't feel like, oh, somebody help me. She didn't feel like she's just throwing tantrums out of nowhere.
Right.
And like seeking for attention. She wasn't this just teenage girl like, oh my God, I don't want to hear or see anybody. No, she's like traumatized. She's like, what the heck is happening with me? What is this? I need to understand it because we have a war to win.
Right.
Right. Because she doesn't understand what all these visions are. So I really, really enjoyed her a lot. Do you believe that she is a sleeper agent or might turn on her friends at any point, not jumping ahead in the story, but at this point in the plot?
I mean, that's obviously a legitimate fear for like Leia and Han, and especially Jag is like very suspicious of Tahiri. I didn't think that she was a sleeper agent or anything like that, but I did think she was approaching some sort of like psychotic break. And it was a little bit like, oh, okay, I hope this doesn't turn out badly.
Yeah. I for some reason, I did have that feeling. I was like, oh man, I almost felt like I'm standing next to her in her scenes. And like, I was trying to like pull somebody's by the neck. I'm like, you need to watch out for her. You need to look over it. Like Jaina, right? Remind me, please. There's like a scene or so where Jaina makes an overture to her and she tries to like console her or ask a couple of questions, right? There's a scene like that.
Yeah, I think Jaina, maybe the first time or the second time she passed out, Jaina was like with her in the hospital and
Right.
was like, you know, talk to me, tell me what's going on. And
Right, so it's that, but I wanted more of that. I constantly felt protective over Tahiri. I wanted somebody to be there for her. Back at the Borosk planet, the showdown between the Imperial forces and the Vong begin. Palayan issues commands he's still encased in his healing Bacta tank, but he's still being the boss that he is in his old age. He's still, you know, in control. Jason discovers Vong spies and their collaborators, the Piz Brigade, gathering them in one room and teaming up with the stormtroopers. He defeats the Vong warriors and the Piz Brigade is arrested. Saba Sabatine discovers a slave ship she saw earlier above her home planet, carrying her people. So her and Danny Key take a Katana Fleet ship using it as bait. So they get captured and they get the slavers out of there. At the end of their adventure, they're liberated along with the prisoners on board by Jason Solo, commandeering a Widowmaker frigate. Vong, who prefer direct warfare and praise combat prowess, are using infiltrators and Peace Brigade as fodder now. What does it say about the Vong military in this stage of war?
I think it really shows how they're on the back foot now, because I mean, if things were going the way they would want, you know, they would just be smashing everyone. But the fact that they're having to like use the Peace Brigade, who they hate, to use infiltrators means they realize like their strategies aren't working and they're trying to adapt to the situation. But I mean, definitely seems like our heroes are winning here.
Yeah, diversifying the Vong portfolio with the Peace Brigade. I'm like, guys, you're a sad, shallow husk of your former selves. You came in waltzing into this galaxy, like swinging hard, man, going planet after planet, like terraforming and bioweaponry here and there, no manor, like just indoctrinating and other planets. And now you take these like space bombs, the Peace Brigade with like literally nobodies, and you're using them. It had a lot to say about this. Like basically at this stage, it's like when during World War II, the Eastern Front counteroffensive, you know, the Soviet soldiers and the rest of the Europe and the French partisans were on the counteroffensive, and they were rocking Germany, and the German generals were already like making footnotes. Oh, this is how we're gonna retreat. Like this, the end is near, and we're not on the winning side. So this is what's happening with these Yuuzhan Vong. They pretty much know it. It's like they're in complete disarray. Once again, repeating the fact that our heroes, they divide their forces. Do you feel that the supporting cast, such as Danny Key and Admiral Palayan and Seba Sipatine and others, have enough impact on the story in this novel?
I think so. I like Danny. You know, I wasn't sure about her at first in Vector Prime, but I came to like her. So getting her to get to do things, to come along this journey, to be a part of like Saba's mission was like so exciting to me, you know, because she would drop out for books at a time and then having her come back and have things to do. And then having, you know, Admiral Palayan, like you said, he's injured, but he's still a boss. He's still in charge of everything. Was I will say, Luke called Palayan by his first name, and I thought that was like the rudest thing I had ever heard.
That was rude.
I was like, this man is 80 years old. He deserves your respect. Don't call him by his first name. You don't know him that well. But I loved getting to see them have like their time in the spotlight, especially compared to the characters you expect to be playing a larger role, like Luke and Mara or Leia and Han.
With characters like Danny Key, you know, sometimes some fans would make arguments when they criticize, let's say, a certain book, let's say New Jedi Order. They would say, well, Danny Key does not have enough play in the story, so she's kind of inconsequential. I really don't like her. What makes me personally invested in characters is just her stuff in Vector Prime alone. What what I find hypnotic is her scenes when her planet that she's on, was it Borleus? That was like completely Belkaden. I'm sorry, Belkaden. When Belkaden gets like attacked by these beetles and completely its ecosystem is devastated, and Danny Key's in her group, she's trying to survive this. It's such a visual and memorable and emotionally impactful scene that I carried that with me into like 5 or 6 novels later. And that's what my appeal is. She doesn't have to have spotlight all the time, but because the way that she was used very effectively in one novel, she's interesting to me. And then we'll go to the next one. Like I said, it's almost like a welcoming a family member, like a cousin, like, oh my God, it's you again. It's like, let's see what's going on. Talk about Saba Sepatine's little personal victory versus the Vong.
I felt like this was, you know, in compared to everything that happens in the novel, a minor moment, but I felt like being able to save that slave ship after she destroyed the one in the prologue was like, you're rooting for her. You're like, yes, she'll get through this. Like, you know, it's almost like redemption for her that like, I messed up here, but I didn't mess up here. I enjoyed that. And
the reason I'm asking this question is to follow up. Did Jason steal her thunder at the end or no?
A little bit. I would have preferred that like Saba and Danny did it all on their own instead of Jason having to swoop in with the Widowmaker.
Not to say that Jason is in any better grasp or control of his emotions, right? Because he also went through a lot of stuff previously. But here I felt it was sort of justified where Saba, she's still like emotional wreck. And I don't frown on other heroes coming in to step up and almost serve as like as a foundation, as a backup, as your wingmate to kind of like spot you over here a little bit, because it's pretty much still her victory.
Yeah.
Whether you're a female or a male character, look, you could be given agency, or agency can be taken out of you regardless of what your sexes are. This is not a conversation about sexism. The conversation is whether this character had their spotlight or not. And here, it's totally her, right? It was her initiative. She went in there. She completely did what she was supposed to do. And Jason arriving, you know, on the white horse at the end, was to me like, yeah, I could see that. Like, we all need a little bit of help at the end. Once again, it reinforces the fact that the Jedi are at their peak when they're together.
Yeah. That
all the heroes, one of the traits is recognizing when you need help and taking it when it's granted. That's what I like it. I never liked heroes like Superman, where it's like bullets fly off him. He doesn't need anybody. As long as he's like, his mind is set right, he wins everybody. I never like heroes like that. I always enjoy, like, for example, in you and I, we talked about the Wonder Woman movie, right? The first one that came out. That it's such a beautiful, intricate balance where she's a force to be reckoned with in that story, yet she has other people, men, teach her things she didn't know about, that she was ignorant about, because she's this innocent person from this island that she was now exposed to this war. And whenever other characters step into her story and teach her something, it never discards what she was doing. She's still as strong, as potent as a character, but others only enhance her deeds and her story. Moving on. The Alliance repels Vong forces at Galantis. An agent informs Han, Leia, and Tahiri of another target that's been out of the communication, the planet Bakura, which we mentioned earlier. The Imperial forces fare equally well at Barask, defeating their Vong invaders. Admiral Palayan makes full recovery and declares official union between the Imperial Remnant and the Galactic Alliance. Most Moffs agree except Corlin Flennick, who threatens his superior with a blaster. He's taken prisoner by the Palayan. Palayan pardons him, and he makes him an offer that he can't refuse. Look, you either be incarcerated and go to prison, or you're going to be granted a full pardon, and you're going to agree that all of the Moffs and the Empire is going to join allegiance with the new alliance. Of course, he prefers the latter.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the new Imperial leadership versus the Emperor's Day a little bit. How are things have changed, and which one do you think is more effective as far as their side of the history goes?
Yeah. Well, obviously, when the Empire was in charge, everything was centralized. Like, there were Moffs, there were admirals, but it all came from the Emperor. He had a game plan for everything. And when he died, it just sort of fell apart. They broke into all these different warring factions. So I think what the Imperial Remnant has been able to build with Palayan and with the Moffs, I mean, the Moffs are pretty garbage at times. They don't really get along. But the fact that there are people like willing to share power makes it feel to me like something more long lasting than Palpatine's empire, because I guess the problem is if you have just one person in charge, as they learned, when that person dies, you have a power vacuum. And so the Moffs are like pretty dysfunctional at times, but I feel like and also like the Imperial Remnant is so much smaller than the Empire ever was, but they seem able to sustain themselves, which feels like they're gonna have more longevity in the end.
Yeah, and they're efficient enough. They're not complete like mess. During the Emperor's reign, right, his 19 or 24-year reign, there is this in an autocratic society. There is this illusion of safety, but honestly, there is this corruption and illusion of power. Which, how do we know that Emperor's reign was ineffective and it was all an illusion? It didn't last over 24 years. It's gone. Right? And even during his time, we have novels like Shadows of the Empire, where Prince Shizor and the Black Syndicate, crime is abundant. It's a plenty. It's flourishing under the Emperor. It's like, so what kind of order to your citizenry are you talking about? So what I really enjoyed about the new Jedi Order, what the new Remnant, Imperial Remnant is experiencing here, is very real. They're now being exposed, that their sovereign planets and systems are exposed to real hurdles and problems of governorship. And they're saying, okay, we have to deal with this over here. We have to figure out how to slay all of our Moffs so we're all on the same page. We have to make a pact with the new alliance. It made it so much more interesting in terms of politics. But also, I kind of was like, breathed out. I was like, oh, finally. The Empire is coming into the fold on its own accord. They're being confronted by realities of how this galaxy runs. Yeah. And when you're being attacked by the enemy from without, you better join forces. And it's, you see this status quo it's changing at a rapid pace, and I really liked following in that. Obviously, Palayan is a man of honor, but he isn't a sole leader, right? He's not an autocrat. What stimulated the change in the Imperial remnant?
I think for me, I think Palayan was behind a lot of the change because they just kept, there were feuding warlords and then their territory kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And it was Palayan, like back at the end of the Bantam era, stepping in and saying, look, guys, we have to come to an agreement with the New Republic or we're not going to be around anymore. And so I feel like, he's the most honorable guy, but he was also this force of change that was like, if we want to survive, we have to change. Even before he was like, we have to change in the new Jedi Order, he was sort of banging that drum all along that, that was, they can't, they have to evolve, they have to adapt, they can't keep being this isolationist group or they're just going to fall apart.
So Palayan was a paradigm shift.
I think so. He felt like that to me.
To me, I think there was a couple of prerequisite instances in Imperial Remnant's history. And when they saw when this heir to the Empire, Thrawn comes back full swing, and as genius as he was, his military stratagems dispelled all illusions that the Empire could be on the offensive ever again.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a military genius, and whatever, either pot shots or like quick stroke of attacks here and there, different parts of the galaxy, strategic points, didn't work out. And later on, he had his son Izard, right, from the X-Wing series.
Yeah.
She was trying more brutal, devastating tactics, employing bioweapons and that virus. That didn't work. And then you had somebody like, Moff Zinch, which I'm reading about now. I'm reading the Wraith Squadron, so he's in there. And it's like a complete buffoon of a guy who thinks with his bravado of glory there. When the Imperial Remnant citizens realize that we can never go back to the past, we can never be the empire that we were, I think it started there amongst common people. Because even when you take like a socialist regime like Soviet Union or China, it is citizenry, as brainwashed as they may be, they're not stupid. Especially Soviet Union was responsible for giving its generations some of the highest education in the world, to a degree where people like from Africa, from Cuba, from all over the world would come and get education there. So you could make a case that you have a government that you disagree with, but the citizens are smart enough to say that, and that's where the shift begins. This is where people begin to change their mind. And like you're rightly saying, that when somebody as charismatic as Palayan comes along, who is a man of honor, he's a man of his word, he's making the right moves, which are changing things for better for the Empire, they're saying, you know what? Yeah, we're ready for this. We're ready for a major change. Do you prefer the Empire's new alliance with the Republic, or do you feel that during the Emperor's reign, their isolationist policies worked better for them?
Oh, I mean, I always want to see people working together. And I think that's one of the arguments people always say, like, oh, well, if the rebellion hadn't happened, if the Empire hadn't fallen, Palpatine would have squashed the Yuuzhan Vong. And it's like, I don't know about that, because I mean, maybe it would have been in Palpatine's best interest to let the Yuuzhan Vong like take out a bunch of worlds he didn't agree with and then try to like slam down on them. So I think for the well-being of the Empire, it's better for them to ally with other places, get new perspectives, become stronger as part of a group. Because I think you were right that like Palpatine's Empire, there's so much corruption in there. Like there's so many issues that like they may on the surface have like all this power, but like once you start to look inside, you're like, oh man, this is rotten.
Yeah, the illusion of safety that he was trying to project. And coming back to Star Wars prequels, you could make a case that immediately after Order 66, that indeed, yes, there's this huge military machine, right? We see some of it in Rebels, we see some of it in Star Wars The Bad Batch, and the Empire is like this steam engine train that's just running full force along the tracks, and nothing could stop it, nothing could be in its way. And there I could sort of say, okay, they don't need anybody. It's a well-oiled machine and it works on its own. When you start introducing other people that you have to rely on, like let's go make an overture to the Chiss in the unknown regions of space, why the heck would you be like owe a favor to these guys when you could be in full control?
Right.
So maybe perhaps I would say from my angle, I would say in the beginning it worked. And maybe perhaps one of the Emperor's visions was that, I really want to have peace in the galaxy, only according to how I say it. Yeah. It's going to be my vision, my mold of the galaxy. But then you learn that it's not really truth, because he employed somebody like Prince Shizor, and he fully understood and knew the underworld, the crime world of the galaxy, and he let it go. He's like, whatever, what happened? I don't need to know. As long as you work for me, you fulfill all the tasks I give you, you're cool. Let's finish up the plot points here and just summarize the book. At the end, Luke Skywalker, Mara, Saba 17, and xenobiologist Soren Hegarty depart Imperial space in search of the Zonoma Secot planet, heading into the Chiss part of the galaxy. On Coruscant, they infiltrate Nomanor's group of dissidents is killed off by the loyal Yuzong Vong warriors, while he escapes and decides to revive the Jedi heresy, leading the shamed ones with his new identity called Yusha, the shamed worker prophet. That's Nomanor for you. Our dear scheming Nomanor just can't help himself, can he? What's his end game?
I think Nominor has like two things in mind, and I think they're somewhat warring with him. And I think there's a part of him that wants to get back in Shimra's good graces, and he'll do anything he can, even if it means like ratting out this whole Jedi heresy. And then I think there's another part of his mind that's like, oh, but if I lead this heresy, I could be bigger than Shimra. And I think that appeals to his ego very much. So I don't think he's decided which track he wants to go down, but I think those are both viable options for him right now.
I almost felt like he is Lando Calrissian playing his sabacc cards close to his chest. He's like, if Jedi come and they win Coruscant back, maybe I can tell them I kind of started the Jedi prophecy of you. I help, can please like spare me? Or like you said, maybe he could go back to his master and say, Shimra is like, you see what I did here? I squashed this underground movement here. I am loyal. I am a good servant. But at the end of it, the only person that needs to survive us for Nomanor is Nomanor and no one else. Such an awesome character. I just love him. I love him. Yeah. Based on his action, is it fair to assume that Nomanor was never truly loyal to his people? Now, forget the governments now. Is he, in his heart and soul, part of his people?
I think so, because he always seemed like he wasn't a true believer. Like there's so many of them that like believe in their gods, believe in this mission, and he was like, nope. So I think I don't know. I mean, you would hope that like Nominor would want the best for his people, but I think in the end, really all he cares about is himself. And so as long as he gets out alive in the end, whether they win or lose isn't as big of a concern to him.
Yeah, it also in my mind as well, he didn't give a shit about anybody. He's just a self-centered individual, like burn it all to hell. Look, if all the Yuzantar burns tomorrow, as long as I get to live. So that's one part of his character that you can't help but hate. He's a scumbag. He's a slime. He's the kind of guy that he has no, honestly, redeeming qualities other than his skill set.
Yeah.
Like, if you put this guy behind the bars and have him instruct others in how to do espionage, yes, he's very valuable. But as a human being, quote unquote, as a person, there's nothing redeemable or likable about him. But I mentioned earlier that Nomanor can't help himself. He is just a creature of his habits. Do you feel that he acted out of self-interest alone? Manipulating and controlling others? Was it his biggest thrill? Was it the reason that he was this way?
I mean, I think he has a very strong self-preservation streak where just whatever he does, he make sure that he comes through it. I do think there's a part of him that enjoys manipulating, because I mean, he's like naturally skilled at it, but I feel like there are people who are naturally skilled in manipulation who don't just like run around manipulating everyone they encounter. And so I do think he gets some sort of like thrill from that as well. Like it's almost his reason for living. Like, I'm good at this and I'm gonna do it.
Yeah, it's, people can't help being who they are, like Saba Sabatine, attacking in the beginning of the book was just, and being completely enraged. That's her nature, Jedi or not. Danny Key and Tahiri Vela, they can't help being who they are. So at least here, the only ounce of sympathy that you can have, he's basically like Joker from Batman movies. That's what he is. You could be judgmental, and obviously we'll all judge. Your mind does not function without putting something on a scale. Good, bad, hot, cold. Same here. Obviously, we all are going to judge him, but I always read him from this angle that I understand what he is. He can't help himself. So that was part of it. And, it's very, very exciting and interesting to try to understand how much of it did authors have in mind when they were shaping, when they were constructing this character, and how much of it just organically came of its own accord. Because, you have Numenor and Vector Prime novel, but writing that segment, you can't foresee what's going to happen 5 books later. You kind of sort of plan for it, but you can't figure out what the minutia of it, what the details are going to be. So it almost feels like organically that's what this character has become under the pen of many different authors over 19 books. And, that's the whole interest there. General questions, what did you dislike about this novel? Kind of take this question and bowl with it and go a little bit over without going too much into the detail of other 2 novels, because I hear a lot of criticism of this trilogy. Like, what's going on?
So one of my biggest issues with the Force Heretic trilogy is a stylistic choice, which is just that Sean Williams and Shane Dix chose not to have chapters. So the books are mostly broken up into these big parts. And there are some authors who don't do chapters, like Terry Pratchett, and that never bothered me because it just feels organic. But here, it almost feels like you're so used to chapters in Star Wars novels, and they're like a natural stopping place, that when chapters are stripped away from you, you're almost like, where can I put the book down? I don't know where to put the book down. And it's like, and I'm not sure really what it adds to the story. Like, I think chapters would have worked fine here. And I think that having no chapters, like, doesn't feel like for a specific reason. It just feels like they made a choice, and I'm a little bit side-eyeing them because I'm like, well, that's weird. And we'll get into this more when we discuss the other 2 Force Heretic books. But once you finish the 3rd one, you just sort of come out of it feeling like some plot events were much less important than others. And so, the journey that Leia and Han and all them are on is important for Tahiri's development and what's going on with Tahiri, but it almost feels like an opportunity to check in on world from Bantam novels that we haven't heard from in a while. And when you look at it in the aspect of like, how does this affect the entire war, you're like, not a lot. So I think that's my biggest criticism, besides the stylistic stuff of the Force Heretic books, is just that, like, once you have the perspective of being able to look over all 3 as a whole, you start to go, wait a minute, but this.
So a lot of it feels very forced and constructed, like artificial.
Yeah, artificial. And also, like, I don't want to say padded for length, but this is the only trilogy we have in the New Jedi Order series. And I know I'm not alone in arguing that I'm not sure it needed to be 3 books in the end.
Okay. Yeah, the prose style and the delivery can be very important. Early, when I started reading books, I wasn't paying attention to how the book is just structured, because sometimes I would fall asleep in the middle of a chapter and have like put a bookmark, And I'm totally fine with waking up. I would sometimes go back and reread one page earlier just to refresh my memory and keep reading. But later I started paying attention not only to like, hey, you know what? Sometimes smaller chapters work better. The story just flows like this.
Yeah.
And even the book style, like the font type, the space between different lines, when you start looking at it, the experience of reading a book, like for example, I'm reading one book right now, which is on the history of Mortal Kombat games and American arcade machines. Beautifully researched book, so detailed, so just well-written book. But because the fonts are so small and the lines in between are so hard to read, it's a bit of a chore. And I could see now, I can understand how that could be annoying. Now, moving that aside, as far as the plot itself is concerned, what would you say are some of the strengths and weaknesses?
I would say strengths is Nominor's plotline for me was the biggest draw here, like what I was most interested in. And I think following him on this journey of like getting deeper into this Jedi heresy was like so interesting. I thought that, you know, bringing the Imperial Remnant back for this fight was very interesting. And even with my quibbles, like I wanted to know what was going on with Tahiri, like what was happening here. I think the weakest part for me was just, it felt like it took a little bit to get them off the ground of like, oh, we're going off on these two separate missions. It was a lot of like, so we need this information. And then finally, like they leave and you're like, oh, thank God. And then, yeah, Leia's, you know, oh, let's check in on people we haven't heard from in a while did leave me feeling a little bit like, okay, why?
Yeah. I can only speak for my initial responses because I've never reread these books. I read them when they originally came out, which is over a decade ago. But I remember being fully invested in it. And I never felt that the trilogy had wasted space or time. I felt like I was in it because I'm the type of reader that can be completely absorbed in a scene.
Right.
And the only prerequisites are A, that it's visual, that it's I can imagine it well, and B, that whatever is transpiring in there maybe is not adding to the overall plot or the pacing of the novel, but it's telling you more something about a planet, the way that these people are, what's going through these characters' minds. Like, for example, there are certain books that I've read which I did not like. You would have entire pages of dialogue where characters are speaking, but they're speaking out of character. They're not delivering any important information. And you, as an experienced reader, you pick up on these things. Yeah. You know, other readers who are lesser versed in I don't know, in literature, or they don't read as much, they just, oh, cool, you know, this happened. Yeah, like, but what does it add to the plot? What my argument here is that sometimes you could have like a small pocket of a story that doesn't, that is not used as a stepping stone, you know, for the rest of the story, but it's doing its own little thing and it's just fleshing things out. It helps you understand the character a little bit better. Maybe, you know, you read something about Jason Soul over here and you take that scene 3 books later and make a mental note or connection there that other readers won't, but it was valuable to you and thus it's important. At the end, what I would like to say is, again, it's going to be fascinating looking at the only trilogy in the New Jedi Order, and I just wanted to hear your score. Like, how would you score it on a scale from 1 to 5 in the scope of this trilogy and in the scope of the New Jedi Order in general?
Yeah, so I think for me, Force Heretic Remnant was a good start, but then also like my thoughts the whole time during the Leia and Han plotline where I'm like, where are we going here? What is the point of this? Dragged it down a little for me. So I think within the trilogy itself, I think that I liked this one, Remnant, more than the second one. But I'm not sure I liked it as much as the third one, so it's sort of in the middle. And then like the trilogy as a whole was sort of like, again, just middling for me in the New Jedi Order, where it didn't reach like the amazing heights of some of the novels, but I was like, it worked. Yeah. Okay. So maybe like three
for this book.
Yeah.
And for the trilogy itself?
3, maybe
3.
oh,
Okay.
maybe 2.5.
So like
I don't know.
above, something that's above average.
Yeah, it's sort of, it's in the middle. You know, it's not low, but it's definitely not high.
Mm-hmm. I don't know whether it was me reading it as just chapters of the whole New Jedi Order series, or what it specifically was. I didn't mind that slower pace at all. It almost like, you know, when you study film, right? They tell you, you know, the story picks up, it goes to this point, and right before it reaches the highest peak, there's one key moment there, which is like almost there, and then the story needs to fall down a little bit and give you enough room to breathe and regroup, and then you give the audience the climax, the absolute greatest part of the film towards the end. So I almost felt like, okay, we are overcame this point where we know now, we feel that the good guys are going to win this war.
Right.
Despite the losses that might happen. But I sort of felt like relief. Like, it's almost like going downhill on a bicycle with this trilogy. Like, you know what? I kind of don't mind. Like, this whole thing, I mean, a Jedi character being stuck in their hotel suit and throwing a feat may not be somebody's idea of a great story piece, you know, in the Star Wars. But for me, it worked. Because I was invested in the character, and it just helped me to understand the small little details. I know that a lot of fans are not detail-oriented, and one way of looking at it is not better than the other. But that's just the way my mind works. So I guess this book, somehow these two authors tailored it to me specifically. So I probably would give it at least 4 out of 5. I guess I'm more lenient.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts? We're going to wrap it up here, Meg, and we're going to continue on next week.
No, I mean, definitely with book 2, we're going to the Chiss territory now, which is interesting because we have not seen them up to this point. And yeah, then exciting to go back to Bakura, which we really have not seen since Truce at Bakura, and then Luke briefly went there in the Corellian trilogy. So again, it's like revisiting these old locations that we haven't seen in a while.
Awesome. Okay, well, I'm looking forward to it. We said everything there is to say about the artwork, but we still have tons of plot to cover. It'll be interesting for me to remind myself what the story is, guys, because I'm picking up on a lot of these details thanks to you, Maggie, and also thanks to going to Wikipedia and actually revisiting the plot. That's the only way I could have remembered, because the books that I have read decades ago, only few of them I remember the plot. Most of them are just the impressions, like, oh, that was really exotic and really cool. Like, for example, Labyrinth of Evil. If you asked me to tell you the plot of that story, I can't now. I just remember loving it. And once I go back to it, I start refreshing my memory. You like kind of like, you know, spurs those brain cells, like, I remember this. Oh, that scene was amazing. You start remembering. So it's almost like a new experience again. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for joining us today. As you have seen, Meg and I, we love talking about New Jedi Order, describing these books to you. We're going to finish up with the Heretic trilogy. We're going to wrap up with this series, and we're going to move on to the Legacy series after that. Thanks a lot for checking us out. Please support Meg's channel. Check her out. I leave all the relevant links in the video section below. Comment in this video. What did you like about this novel? What you didn't? Give us an idea what you thought about the rest of this trilogy. And we'll see you guys next week. Take care, everyone.